I'm Brandon Staglin, and this is One Mind Brainwaves. One of today's guests on the show is going to have a saying, which is that every family in America, it falls into one of two categories: those that are struggling with the mental illness, and those that are not struggling with the mental illness yet. A little later in the program, after our first guest, later in the program, we'll be talking with the former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, Dr. Thomas Insel. He's also now the author of a new book called Healing: Our Path from Mental Illness to Mental Health. And it's an amazing read. I hope you'll read it when it releases in February. But with the right treatment and support, the diagnosis of even a serious mental health condition doesn't have to be a life sentence. Reaching the Light, a short documentary film produced by Alpheus Media for One Mind and sponsored by Otsuka and Lundbeck, shows the stories of three brave individuals whose mental health journeys toward healing have been lengthy and arduous, but ultimately positive.
I was a very popular girl. I won friendliest in high school, but I knew something was wrong.
I started having feelings of hopelessness really in probably grade school.
I have had depression for as long as I can remember. My early childhood was extremely abusive in every facet of the word.
I was small, I was skinny, I was weak, which was not a good combination in Alaska in the 70s. There was so many emotional explosions in the house. I'm getting beaten up at home verbally by mom, I'm getting beaten up physically at school, and I thought, the world is insane.
Major depressive disorder is a cluster of symptoms. It is a lack of ability to function in the world in the way the person wants to.
It's like being rolled along underneath a wave, a big wave. And I'm telling you, you are not coming up. I was not coming up.
I, to my core, don't think I deserve to be alive. And I don't want to feel like that anymore.
But for a long time, I was a coach. And so people know me as Coach Kim. So they'll say, I love to swim, I love Coach Kim.
I was a rock star in the Navy. I got Junior Sailor of the Year. I got a lot of awards. I have 3 Navy Achievement Medals. The Navy gave me the external validation that I needed for a really long time.
To be better, you have to tell the truth about yourself. In my case, that included being gay. I was carrying a secret, so I drank over that. I didn't want to be different. I went 3 times into psychiatric facilities by my own hand, trying to get better.
My early ways of coping with depression were through humor. I grew up listening to stand-up comedy. I learned to seek out the sad parts of my life and turn them into humor so that I could find something positive in those.
I'm an ex-athlete. I've always had a coach, and those prescribers are my coach. Those therapists are my coach. If they tell me to add a medication, I do it. The things that I do that are non-medication oriented, because I will not live just okay not doing it. First of all, I box 3 days a week.
You got about 30 more seconds. Don't get me.
I realized after a few years that I needed to do more than just take this pill. It was keeping me from sinking into the depths, but I would sit on the couch and say, I want to be happy. And then one day I realized to be is a verb. Maybe I should do things that make me happy in order to be happy.
Right then. I don't wait to say, am I depressed? But what I have to know is I can do this. And so the second I feel it, I tell myself, Kimberly, you can do this. Get to work.
I am getting better at saying that has nothing to do with me. I'm still gonna go for this walk. I'm still gonna meditate today.
Joining me now is one of the people you just met. She's a psychological safety consultant, a mental health advocate, and host of the popular podcast, Absolutely Not. Katrina Stroll, welcome to Brainwaves.
Thank you so much for having me. What an amazing introduction. Thanks.
You're welcome. Well, you're an amazing person. It's only fitting. Thank you for being with us today. It's an honor. Katrina, great to have you on the show. And viewers, thank you too for watching. We want to hear from you as well. If you have comments or questions, feel free to post them in the chat feature at any time. And if you know of anyone who might benefit from the knowledge and wisdom we're sharing today, please share this webcast with them as well. Thank you. So Katrina, I saw your story in Reaching the Light, and it's really inspirational. After a difficult and traumatic childhood, you went on to a successful naval career and now a loving family with your husband and your son. But everyone's lived experience is unique. But like many people, your diagnosis that you received is somewhat common in that it is complex. Everyone's diagnosis, many people's diagnoses are complex. And your diagnosis includes depression, but it's more than that. Can you please elaborate a bit on your story as you'd like to tell it, and your diagnosis, what that means to you?
So one of the great things I've learned about through my own research and learning more about my 3 conditions that I come with is that diagnoses were supposed to or intended to be shorthands, just a very short description, but practitioners are supposed to look more in depth into like the experiences of the person that diagnosis comes with. As I found out that information, I do the same with myself every single day. I remind myself like, okay, just because that person has the same diagnosis as me doesn't mean the symptoms are the same, doesn't mean our experiences are the same. You still have to tell your story the way it is written, the way it is true for you. So I think that's where I'm at with my diagnosis is I'm constantly reassuring myself that it's okay to be truthful about your experiences and how we got to where we are today.
That's a great answer and so true. I empathize with that a lot. My diagnosis, schizophrenia, I say it, although it has an influence on me, it doesn't define me. And there's so much more to every individual, including me, including you, that really goes more into defining who we are. And our experiences are myriad and very rich. So what are your diagnoses in addition to depression?
So I live with post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, as you've seen in the documentary trailer, and substance use disorder.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And in terms of recovery, your recovery journey with those conditions, we know that families are a big part of treatment and recovery, and you touch a bit on this in the documentary. Can you please tell us about how your husband and his loving support have been so helpful to you in getting the appropriate care you need and just supporting you overall?
So in 2018, I decided to take my own life and was hospitalized shortly after. When I was in the hospital, my husband was taking care of our son, and I had so many thoughts running through my mind, just like, I wasn't, when you're hospitalized, you're not able to really contact with people outside of the hospital. So I was just like, what's going to happen when I get out of here? We're going to have a conversation about this. I now have diagnoses. And I expected just a weird conversation to happen. My husband embraced me with open arms and immediately told me that everything was going to be okay, and really just validated me in those diagnoses. One of the things he said to me was like, why wouldn't you be? Like, why wouldn't you have had to be hospitalized? Like, all of this is normal for what you have been through. And that really helped me in accepting the diagnoses that I came out of the hospital with.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a show on TV, The Me You Don't See, which Oprah Winfrey has hosted, and she talks about there's so much more to people. Their stories are so important to understand, and then that kind of feeds into what they live with now, right? And so it sounds like your husband's acceptance of your history and your long experiences that were challenging in many ways gave validation to what you're experiencing right now and the diagnosis you received. Great to hear. Peer support has also been found to be incredibly important in helping people with resilience and strength on their mental health journeys. And that's exactly what you're doing right now. Your website describes you as a dedicated resource for people from historically excluded communities. And can you please tell us a bit about your experience in receiving care as a member of an excluded community, as well as how that inspires you now, the work you do for workplace mental health?
So I am Black and Samoan, and in those communities, even in my upbringing, the words mental and health were never used together in a sentence. We actually never talked about our physical health or our brain health overall. So when I was diagnosed, a lot of people in my communities immediately shunned me and kind of excluded me for having the new identities that I came with. I'm still Black, I'm still Samoan, but now I am part of a larger community of people with mental health conditions. There's a lot of stigma, as we all know, that comes with mental health, and being a part of those communities even more so. I could not find anybody who shared my racial identities and my mental health conditions who were also vocal about it. It was all very hush hush and under like, okay, we can talk over here, but please don't tell people that I also have diagnosis. So I am constantly being a space where people can be their full selves, because I didn't have that space when I was diagnosed.
That is awesome. Thank you for doing the work that you do. It's incredibly important. And the work you do in workplace mental health, can you please share a bit more in detail about that?
Mhm. So one of my biggest hats, I wear multiple hats, but one of my biggest hats is a psychological safety consultant. So in 2018, that suicide attempt occurred because of the unsafe work environment I was a part of. I was diagnosed, I was a new mother, so I had new needs and conditions. And because I was out of the office so often, I started being targeted. People started telling me I wasn't earning my paycheck, that I wasn't being a team player, that I wasn't just everything. And I internalized that messaging. So now I work with organizations to ensure that doesn't ever occur again, that people don't ever feel like they don't belong in spaces, that people don't ever feel unsafe to be their full selves. That's my whole bag now.
That's phenomenal. That's so important. I remember when I was working in the Silicon Valley in the 1990s, when I was having a relapse of schizophrenia, I couldn't tell anybody at all about the symptoms I was having and why. There's so much stigma out there and discrimination. I thought I might be fired. And so I told nobody, and I did relapse, and I had to resign from the job. Thank you for doing the work you do to make workplaces a safe space for people to be their full selves and to be open about whatever they're experiencing. Amazing. You work with the Stability Network, isn't that right?
I do. And that's another great community I've found from being vocal. If I had not been vocal about my mental health conditions, I wouldn't know that that organization existed, or that you can publicly speak about your mental health experiences and possibly be paid for it.
Great. I'm so glad you're speaking out. I'm a member of the Stability Network as well, and yeah, excited to have a fellow stability leader meeting you today. So how does the sense of purpose you derive from your work inspire you on your healing journey?
Mm. So I don't subscribe to purposes, and if I did, then I sure haven't found it yet. I still haven't found it yet, but what I do subscribe to, and what is part of the work and journey that I'm doing now, is really extracting myself, my worth, and everything I think about myself from my work. Hey, I didn't sign 2 clients this month. That doesn't mean I'm a piece of shit. I'm still a human being. I am a human being overall. So I think if I did have a purpose right now, that would be constantly extracting my worth from my work and telling others to do the same.
Yeah, I love that. I'm trying to define boundaries between my personal life and my work life so I can have time to relax and decompress and recharge. Right. My psychiatrist tells me that's important, and I know internally that's important as well. So it does make a difference. And then what does your care routine look like today? You talk about, for one thing, having a balance of work and life and separation there. But what activities do you do to maintain your sense of well-being?
Mm. My care activities revolve around honesty and like my limitations. Like we have mental health conditions, so we know there's a lot of stuff I can't do. For a long time, I believed that I was able to work full time, like 10 hours a day, keep going and stuff. And that's just not honest about myself. I'm completely drained after 2 meetings. So that I have to constantly be honest about that. So my day looks a lot like waking up, eating a whole breakfast, not just a granola bar, not just then going on my peaceful walk, having meditations. The biggest thing that has helped me the most is I do recordings of myself at the end of the day, just saying like, wow, you kicked that meeting's ass today. I'm so proud of you for just showing up and being very authentic and being honest about what you needed in that space. Because as we all know, the voices in your head are you. They sound exactly like you. So in order to combat that, I have to make sure I have me saying nice things about myself. That's helped a lot.
That's awesome. Good for you. That's awesome. I try to think of things I'm grateful for as well when I meditate, and that makes a difference as well. Yeah. And then finally, Katrina, what gives you hope?
Mhm. What gives me hope is the fact that I am in the spaces I am in. Few years ago, when I first was diagnosed, I don't think anybody would have allowed me to speak about my diagnosis so publicly or the way that I speak about it. And it brings me hope to see that I have moved forward in this journey. Like I am able to speak about it in more spaces and honestly not trigger myself in doing so. So my own growth is giving me hope, and it's making me hopeful for my son's future, my husband's future, people who are in community with me's future in mental health.
That's awesome. You're giving me hope with all the speaking that you're doing, with being in Reaching the Light. Thank you for being with us today on Brainwaves, as well as being in Reaching the Light. You're inspiring so many people with the work that you do.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. If you'd like to see more of Katrina, please watch Reaching the Light, which you can watch in its entirety on One Mind's social channels, as well as our website. It releases February 1st. Please check it out. Katrina, thanks again. Take care. Our next guest served as the director of the National Institute of Mental Health from 2002 to 2015, and that's why I first met him. He's actually one of my heroes in the field of mental health, an amazing man. He also is the co-founder of MindSight News, an incredible new journalism site on mental health, as well as Humanist Care, a step care online program for people experiencing mental health challenges. He's also served as a special advisor to California Governor Gavin Newsom, and he's the author of the upcoming book, Healing: Our Path from Mental Illness to Mental Health. And he's here to talk about that with us today. Dr. Tom Insel, thank you for being with us on Brainwaves, and welcome.
Hey, Brandon, great to be here. And I don't usually get described as a hero, but I'm going to send that right back to you because you have been one of the people who has really inspired so much of what I've worked on. And no surprise, you're a main character in the book. And a lot of what went into the book was what I learned from you and from our conversation. So it'll be fun to have a little bit of that conversation shared by others as well.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Tom. I feel honored to be included in your book and to have the opportunity to have my story shared to inspire healing, as you talk about in your book, which is, of course, the title of your book. And viewers, thank you so much for watching again today. And if you have any questions for Dr. Insel during the webcast, please feel free to post them at any time, or comments you'd like to post, please do that. And if you have any thoughts of somebody who might benefit from what we're learning today in the webcast, please share this with them as well. Thank you. So Tom, you have had a very long and distinguished career in the mental health field. But when you embarked on the research and discovery for this book, Healing, you approached it not as a psychiatrist or a neuroscientist, but rather as a journalist. Why did you decide to approach it that way?
Well, the book started with my trying to figure out a problem that I couldn't solve, and that's often the best way to start to write something like this. I was thinking for a long time about this gap between all the progress we had in science, and at NIMH, it was such a privilege to be in the boat when we were doing all that. I mean, to actually see what was happening in neuroscience and genomics, the work in stem cells. I mean, just that period, 2002 to 2015, was explosive with progress. And One Mind was certainly part of that. So, each September at the music festival, we'd sort of try to capture a lot of what was going on. It was stunning. And yet, at the same time, during those same years, we just didn't see that kind of progress on the public health side of mental health. We actually saw what I would call a mental health crisis develop. Suicide went up 30%, drug overdoses in those years went up about 300%. We saw just enormous uh, problems with chronic disability for people with serious mental illness, with a huge piece of that actually playing out outside of the healthcare system, which is why when I tried to understand this problem, I couldn't simply stay within the healthcare system as a psychiatrist. I had to start seeing the problem where it was. And in some ways, it felt like it was everywhere except the healthcare system. It was in jails, in prisons, in homeless shelters, on the street. It was lots of places. And essentially, this was kind of the essence of that gap. It was that people were not engaged in care. And the only way to see them, the only way to hear about that was to go to where they were and not to go where providers and payers were focused, not to brick and mortar hospitals and clinics, but go to those sites where the problem really was residing.
Hmm. Yeah, it's amazing you took the initiative and went out and met so many people dealing with their own challenges, as well as the providers in the process of trying to learn what to do about this crisis as you talk about it. You traveled the state of California, you visited facilities throughout the United States and throughout the world, and you learned a heck of a lot, which you incorporated into this book. What surprised you the most about what you learned from all these conversations?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Probably the thing that surprised me the most was how wrong I had been about some of my assumptions at NIMH. I had this kind of mantra at NIMH that we wouldn't be able to do better until we knew more, that we just didn't know enough about the biology of these illnesses to be able to come up with the treatments that would really make a difference. What I came to understand was that was just wrong, that we actually knew enough today to make a huge difference, to do far, far better than what we were doing. We do not have to incarcerate people for having a brain disorder. We never used to do that. That wasn't something that we did when I started in the field in the 1970s and 1980s. So, what's that about? I mean, that's not, we don't need to know more about the biology of these disorders to have people in the healthcare system instead of the criminal justice system. So, a lot of what the real problems were about our lack of progress wasn't lack of knowledge, it was just our lack of commitment or our inability to do what to act upon what we actually know. So much of what I came to understand was that we bought into a model for how to address mental illness that was kind of the model that infectious diseases have used, or those who are experts on infectious disease use, which is that these are simple problems. They're caused by simple bugs and cured by simple drugs. And that medical model just doesn't work here. It just, unfortunately, I wish it did, and maybe someday it will. But these are more complicated problems that require medical solutions, psychological solutions, rehabilitative care, a commitment over time, totally different than the world of care that we built, which is crisis targeted, very expensive, very intensive, but it's not comprehensive and it doesn't follow people in a way that really helps them to recover. So I began to shift from this kind of medical model to a model that was more about recovery. And
Mm,
that became for me the real sort of the touchstone of everything I began to learn as I talked to people and listen carefully to families and patients, that it wasn't just about reducing symptoms, it was about recovery, about getting a life. That's what people wanted. And we know how to do that. We actually know and have known for years how to do that. That was to me the great discovery, that we were failing people not because we didn't know, but because we didn't act.
interesting. That's fascinating, and counter to what I had expected as well. Prior to reading your book and learning from you about this problem, the a major theme of healing, as you're describing now, is that we need to move away from this crisis care system that focuses on reduction of symptoms to recovery-oriented, person-centered care system that is proactive and helps people where they are. And you also talk about the need to integrate what you call the 3 Ps into every system aiming for recovery. What are those 3 Ps and why are they so important?
Yeah, this was, the original name of the book was Recovery because I got so kind of obsessed with this concept, which I actually never fully understood before. I was talking to a psychiatrist who works on LA's Skid Row, and I asked him, "How do you think about recovery?" And he said, "That's it's simple, man. It's the 3 Ps." And my response at the time was, I thought, well, there's Prozac, there's Paxil. I was thinking, like, what's that third? What is it? It's like psychotherapy, or is it Prolixin? Now, wouldn't be. And he was looking at me like over his wire-rimmed glasses with kind of just, complete contempt. He finally said, "Look, man, it's people, place, purpose. When we talk about recovery, we need to talk about people, social support, place, having a sanctuary that's safe, that's nurturing, that's supportive, and giving people something to do, something, having a mission, having a purpose." Those 3 Ps, people, place, and purpose, became for me really the guiding principles for what we needed to think about, and how we needed to build the care system around them. This isn't to say that medicine's not important, or we don't need to reduce symptoms, or we don't need to have diagnosis. I think all that is critical. But where I came out for the book and kind of the final message of the book is, yes, the problem is medical. And in that sense, we need parity, we need rigor, we need science. It's a medical problem. These are brain disorders, but the solutions are so much more than medical. The solutions are social, they're environmental, they're political, they're a range of things that need to be put in place to ensure those 3 Ps. And we can do that.
That's inspiring to know that we can do that. I'd love to hear more about that. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the conversation. And it fits well with my experience as well. Medication is something that helped me to stabilize with my mental illness that I experienced. But the other dimensions of lifestyle changes, I mean, you mentioned some of the things I do for my own recovery in your book. You have music and meditation as well as medicine.
You had
3M,
the 3 Ms. You
3
had the
M's,
3 Ms.
yeah.
I had the
Okay.
3 Ps, but actually they match up. And I was thinking about that. I recently did the audiobook and I was reading through the section where you talk about that. And maybe actually, can I get you to just unpack that a little bit for others? Because I learned a lot in that conversation with you about how that played out for you.
Yeah, certainly. So medication is something that I've taken from the beginning of my engagement with the care system, and I've tried different medications over the years, settling on a series of 4 that I currently take and have since around 2005. And the side effects are fortunately minimal for me, and so I stay on the same medications. And the effects on reducing the psychosis are very pronounced. That's one of my primary symptoms was psychosis, living with schizophrenia. So that's great. I haven't had serious psychotic issues for about 20 years. But the other aspects of recovery are not just reducing symptoms, as you say in the book. They're actually living a life that you care about. and doing the things that you want to do and value doing in your life. So developing the ability to be motivated has been helped greatly by what I've learned in playing music. Music is an activity. Playing music is an activity that enables you to get caught up in a flow state, like you're trying to play a song. I'm not very good at playing, so I'm trying to play songs, and um, getting from chord to chord, note to note, verse to verse is something that motivates me to stay engaged with my attention and not dissociate. It's something that I used to do a lot, and that practice of doing that keeps me more, even when I'm not playing, more engaged in reality. Yeah, so, and motivated to do things in reality. So that's been a very helpful thing. Meditation has a very helpful effect as well for me in terms of staying calm and focused, and being aware also of what's around me in the world that I'm engaged in. And so it's very, very helpful in that regard too. I try to do those things regularly. And a third thing that's helped me to really recover is something that you mentioned Ellen Sachs in your book as another hero of mine and of many people in mental health. But her reading her book helped me to accept that I have this condition that I'm likely have to manage for the rest of my life. And so accepting it helped me to move beyond the fighting it in my mind and just letting it be what it is and dealing with it in a proactive and constructive way. And then I can move on to do things that I care about, which is what I talked about as the definition of recovery. So all those things,
Yeah.
coupled with the work that I do and the people that are in my life that are so helpful and that I love, are give me a sense of purpose and meaning.
That's great, Brandon. I think we covered the 3 Ps there because
Mhm.
when we talked originally, you talked a lot about how the people in your life really gave you a reason to get better. I was really struck by
Mhm.
that story about I think it was an interaction with your grandmother, and just feeling like, oh, I have a role here, and I belong. There are people who care about me, and I care about them. And so the people, you had a place, you had a home that was in fact a sanctuary, and that gave you that opportunity to find your way and to accept all of this. And I think the way you've played out on the purpose side of this, everything from the work you do at One Mind to your commitment to music and to the people in your life, it's been really inspiring. So um, you show up in I think in the introduction of the book now, the way it's finally played out, and that's I think entirely fitting because it was our conversations that really helped me to think through, how does this work and what does it look like when it works? So much of what we deal with when we're talking about serious mental illness are these images in our minds. The person who takes over a synagogue in Texas and holds hostages, that becomes the public's concept of what a serious mental illness is. And we have to be honest that untreated serious mental illness can look like that. It can be scary and dangerous and very destructive. That these are horrific illnesses. But with treatment and with time and with, as you say, acceptance, but also care, things can go very differently and people really can have a life. And we don't have enough of that picture of what this looks like. Well, we're really good when we talk about breast cancer, we're really good at talking about the survivors and the people who have gone on to have incredibly successful lives for decades after getting over breast cancer. As they say, there are always breast cancer survivors. They don't lose that identity. With serious mental illness, I think we get hung up on that kind of stage 4, that crisis, that worst episode, and we don't talk enough about uh, the Brandon Staglins, the Ellen Sachses, the thousands, tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of people who have struggled through and recovered and have lives
Mhm.
to show. Um, with schizophrenia, that doesn't define them. And I think we have to find our way to that in a much more kind of authentic way.
Absolutely. And you do share the experiences of people who have dealt with mental health challenges in your book, including me, thank you, and others. And when it comes to, well, you talk about how the needs of people with mental illness are widely varied and complex in many ways. How common is it for the experience of people like Katrina Stroll, who was the guest on the show before you just now, um, to overcome a variety of different diagnoses in one's own life and to move on to live a life of that purpose? And are diagnostic labels even helpful in somebody's recovery?
Yeah, this kind of goes back, and she's, by the way, inspiring. I think she's just brilliant in what she's been able to do. And it reminds you just how challenging all this can be. Does diagnosis help or hinder? It there's not a simple answer to that. Um, I go back to that notion that I do think we start with a medical formulation here. It is important, uh, particularly at an early stage, to sort of define the problem as medical and get treatment that is every bit as scientifically based as what you would expect for any other medical problem. I just don't want us to stop there. And she didn't, she was able to say, okay, that was then, this is now. There are ways I can go on and actually succeed. And, the part of her story with resonates, and it really does resonate with your story, was finding a purpose, finding something to get better for, that old saw, which actually I think is originally from Nietzsche, that became this essence of logotherapy for many years from Viktor Frankl, was that the person who has a why can live with almost any how. And I think that's so critical, is having a purpose, having a mission, having something to live for. Um, I remember very difficult conversation with Marsha Linehan. It might have been at the time when you were on the NIMH council, or maybe before you were on. She was on the council for many years and was a good advisor for me. And we used to argue all the time, which was fabulous. It was wonderful. I learned so much from her because she never agreed with me, and she was probably almost always right. But she had this idea that we just totally mistake how to address someone who's suicidal, that our notion in the medical system of what you do when somebody is suicidal is you try to lock them up. And she said that communicates helplessness and hopelessness on your part. What you really need, or if you're a person who wants to die, is you need a reason to live. And our commitment needs to be to help people find that reason to live. And I was really taken with that notion at the time. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to integrate it into what NIMH was thinking about. But it becomes one of the driving factors in writing the book, is helping people to find a way to make sense of what they're going through and to use that. And that reason to live, that mission, can be nothing more than taking that lived experience and using it to help other people going through the same thing. That was the basis of humanist care. It's giving people the tools to support each other.
Mhm.
And when we looked at like the work that Mental Health America has done, where you ask people struggling, what do you want most of all? They don't say medicine, they don't say psychotherapy. They say, I want credible information and I want to connect to somebody just like me. And
Yeah.
so for Humanist, a large part of what we were focusing on is how do we give them the information that matters, and how do we help them to connect to others so that they can take their experience and be helpful, and they can take other people's experience and get help. And that turns out to be the essence of empowerment and of therapy, is giving somebody a chance to help someone else.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I can totally empathize with that. And that's what Katrina is doing as well in her work now as a webcaster and podcast host. She's amazing, as you say. Um, so you write also that rather than needing breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs for new treatments, what can help patients and people who experience these challenges even more are care models that not only integrate multiple kind of overlooked approaches, but also bake in that building of sense of purpose, like you have talked about so much and so well. How do care models such as coordinated specialty care, which you and I have championed in California and beyond, how can care models that integrate multiple approaches and build on the patient's goals and values help people like Katrina?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I do think we need the science still, and I'm by no means not anti-research or anti-science, and in particular, I think getting better in the kind of precision medicine approach where we understand which treatments for which person at which time, super important, and we can always benefit from better treatments, no question about that. But to your point, there's this need as well to find ways to take what we do now, the things that we know about, and provide them in a way that works better. Integration is a huge piece of it. Here in California, in particular, we have lots of resources, but they're so fragmented. It's very hard for anyone to navigate, patients, families, even providers. It's really hard to navigate. So something like coordinated specialty care is a great example where you have, in this case, a formal model that says, look, it's not just one thing that somebody with a first episode of psychosis needs. It's a bunch of things. Yeah, they need medication, they need cognitive therapy, they need social support, they need academic and work support. There's just this whole range of important pieces that have to go together to build the puzzle, to kind of really, some of them are edge pieces, some of them are center pieces, but they all need to be put in place over a couple of years for people to recover. And I think coordinated specialty care now in 240 clinics across the United States, that's a great model for how we can do so much better to make sure that anybody with a first episode of psychosis doesn't have a second episode. And that could have enormous impact on the thing I talked about at the beginning, that failure to make progress on the public health side of this crisis. If you could make sure that no one ever has more than a single episode, that will have an enormous impact.
Yeah, you talk about that as a secondary prevention. When you talk about prevention, there's the three stages of primary, kind of the public health level, secondary, it's helping people who are at risk to avoid further challenges, and then tertiary, which is helping prevent serious challenges after a serious episode. So that fits right in there. And I agree, it's really important and can save lots of lives and financial burden at the same time. One question everyone listening or watching might have is about the economics. So if we're committing to a system of care that's going to help people in a rehabilitative, holistic way and engage with them over a long term to help them recover, there's likely to be costs involved. But you also noticed in your research that some of the most effective treatments are some of the least expensive at the same time. Can you expand a bit on that, please?
Right. So this all starts with an insight that I completely missed for many, many years. And that is that if you had asked me a decade ago to talk about mental health, I would have talked about mental health care. And I would have assumed that health is about healthcare. We have now the work of people like Sir Michael Marmot and Don Berwick and many others who have begun to show that in the realm of medicine, there is a vast difference between health and healthcare. That healthcare itself, maybe it accounts for about 10, maybe 20% of health outcomes, but there's so much more that we can do. And that to some extent has to do with the 3 Ps. It has to do with lifestyle. It has to do with a range of factors. Sometimes we used to call them social determinants or social influences. Some people now call them the sort of the critical indicators for well-being, however you want to think about this, it's your zip code, not your DNA code that people are now focused on when we think about health and not just health care. So that is absolutely the case in the mental health space as well. And what you begin to see is the way the power of things like social connection, social support. These aren't super expensive. It's actually what AA does without paying, there's no money. It's not transactional at all in that sense. And yet it's very effective for people with substance abuse disorders. It's no less effective for people with mood disorders, anxiety disorders, psychotic disorders, that chance to come together and to support each other through the storm. Incredibly powerful, not very expensive. The healthcare system doesn't work that way. It's a very hierarchical system based on a few experts who get paid very well to dispense their information in a 50-minute hour once a week. That's I don't think that's the system you would design if you were a patient or a family member. You'd be thinking about something that looked very different, maybe something that looked more like Peloton or like a Minute Clinic, or you could imagine lots of other sort of designs for how you might want to get care.
Uh-huh.
And you might also think about care as being a little different than the healthcare system as we know it, which is absolutely, if you step back and think about it, it is the most expensive and intensive system you could imagine. I mean, who would have designed it in the way we have unless you were trying to spend as much money as you could in as sporadically and episodically as you might? And it's not one that works really for anybody.
Yeah.
So it is time to rethink it, come up with other models that are less expensive and more compassionate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I sense a revolution coming on in healthcare and in health for people. And your book can help spark such a movement to change things. You talk about the wide variety of lifestyle factors we need to look at, including the results of income inequalities and discrimination. And these often lead to treatment access disparities and outcome disparities in people's lives. How do we further democratize mental health care to make sure we're serving the disenfranchised, overlooked communities, including people of color?
Yeah, Paul Farmer likes to say that if you want to reduce the inequalities in outcomes, you have to reduce the inequalities in incomes. And I think that's a nice way to capture some of the social factors that are real drivers on these issues. But to be fair, I mean, if you look at the data, mental illness, particularly serious mental illness, is kind of an equal opportunity set of disorders. It doesn't just affect poor people. It doesn't just affect people with trauma, although a lot of people today say that. It has a way of crossing all kinds of boundaries that we don't quite understand why or can't predict who. But this is a disorder that affects the entire spectrum of society. What really matters is what is the care you get. And so that's where income inequality and where racial ethnic differences really play out, right? It's, whether you're going to get the highest quality of care. So that how to democratize that comes in a couple of ways. One is thinking about changing the workforce itself. How do you have a workforce that is trusted, resembles more closely the people that workforce is trying to serve? I don't know if that matters for pathologists or anesthesiologists, but for people in the behavioral health workforce, yeah, it really does matter. You have to speak the language, you have to understand the culture, you have to know the community, the people you're trying to serve. And we don't do that very well in this current healthcare workforce.
Mm-hmm.
But there's more than that. I mean, I think this is a place to think about innovation as well, and to understand that technology can really help to democratize care. You can, provide for some sorts of manualized structured care like CBT for mood disorders, you could provide the same care to people in Botswana and Boston through the internet. So it is one way to democratize care. People always are concerned about the divide, the internet divide, that not everybody has access. And I think we learned a lot about that. The lack of broadband access during COVID, the kids who couldn't actually get access to school. But there's a movement underfoot through the infrastructure plan to begin to disseminate broadband very widely in the United States. We have a ways to go to catch up to much of the rest of the world. Always strikes me that when I travel internationally, I have better internet access than I have in my own backyard in California. But we'll get there. And I think once that infrastructure is put into place, the opportunity for technology to change the way people get psychological care could get really much, much better. That really could be part of the solution. It's not the whole thing, because we need more than software. We need human touch. We need high tech and high touch. But it'll get us part of the way there. And one of the things we've learned, I think, with technology is that we can use it. We can use high tech to improve high touch. And that's a real challenge for the next 4 or 5 years.
Absolutely. And your experience with digital mental health care is extensive as well, having worked in the field for several years up until now as well. So thanks for sharing that about technology and how that can help. What ultimately are the takeaways? If we can transition from our current reactive crisis-oriented care system to a more proactive person-centered recovery-oriented care system, how will that affect the lives of people who are afflicted with these conditions? How will it affect the lives of us all? And what can interested viewers do to help start this revolution alongside you and One Mind, all the other organizations that are a part of this work?
Well, Brandon, when I started the book, I was really focused on healing for people with serious mental illness and putting the pieces in place, which, as I point out in the book, we used to have in place pretty much. 40 years ago, we did better than we do today. That's not true for cancer and heart disease, but in this space, we've actually lost ground, not gained ground, with all that scientific progress. But as the book was finishing, and I was working on this in 2019 mostly, I began thinking how healing was actually something more important than just that kind of focus on mental health and mental health care. This was speaking to a need that all of us had for a country that was so badly broken. As President Biden was saying during the campaign, as I was listening, we have to heal the soul of our nation. And I think he got it just right. And I don't think that's happened yet. But part of why I want this to become a social movement is because I think if all of us recognize the opportunity we have to help those who are struggling the most, those who have been neglected the most, those who are essentially incarcerated and homeless because we haven't dealt with problems that are truly fixable. If we can focus on that in a way as our problem, not their problem, it's our responsibility. As President Kennedy said in 1963, they must no longer be alien to our affections. And as he also recognized that by healing them, we're healing ourselves. We are becoming a better nation. We are beginning to actually cure the soul of the nation in a way that we need. That's the message, that this is really not about, it's not about the 14.2 million people with serious mental illness only. It's about all of us. Or as I say, there are only two kinds of families in the United States. There are families who are struggling with a mental illness, and the families who aren't struggling with a mental illness yet. But soon all of us struggle with this. We all become involuntary experts. We all have to understand that we can do so much better than we've done. And the purpose of the book was to really start that movement that helps us all to grasp that and to begin not just to try to learn more, but to do better with what we know now.
It takes a village, it takes a community, it takes our society to make a difference for people who are struggling. And that is a major theme of your book. And I look forward to working with you to make this a reality. So you end the book on a very hopeful note. And that's how we like to end our show. With a question we always ask at the end of every Brainwaves episode: what gives you hope, Dr. Tom Insel?
Well, I am hopeful by nature. So and the book is a very hopeful story because it's largely about people who have recovered. What gives me hope are the conversations with people like you, with Ellen Sachs, with so many others who prove the point, who demonstrate that having a mental illness is not a life sentence. It is something that happens to you. It's an illness. It's not an identity. That there's so much that people can accomplish. I used to say in spite of it. Now I begin to think because of that, this really is a way for people to recover. And that, like we often say that when you break a bone, at the point where the bone heals is the strongest part of that bone. It doesn't break there again. We need to think about mental illness in just the same way, that when you recover, you get a strength, you get a resilience, you get a kind of knowledge about yourself, both your vulnerabilities and your strengths. And that's a place where you don't break again.
Extremely well said. Thank you for articulating it so well. It's a theme I champion myself, including in a song that I wrote and performed at several different public venues a few years ago called Horizons Left to Chase. With the chorus of it starts with the words, "Been diagnosed with schizophrenia, guess what? It's not the end of you." And it's about all the amazing things you can do despite, or in fact, because of the experience with serious mental health challenges. So thank you for your inspiring sharing of your wisdom today with us. Thank you so much, Tom, for being with us on Brainwaves today. And viewers, thank you too. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to post them on this webcast. You're welcome to check out all of our past Brainwaves episodes at onemind.org/brainwaves, where this one will be housed after the show is over. You can share it with people there. And you can sign up for our newsletter there to be informed of all future Brainwaves episodes. So Tom, thanks so much.
Brandon, thanks for having me. And thanks so much for helping on this project. I look forward to working with you. We're going to start a movement together.
All right, let's move. Let's
All
move
right.
out. Okay,
Take care.
thank you. You too. And viewers, take care. Remember, what's a brain good for? Making waves. Let's make some waves together. Thanks for being on Brainwaves. Bye-bye.
Mental health is stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight.
I think I need help.
Can you talk?
Struggling.
I'm here.
Depressed. Can't sleep.
But we need the science and solutions to change lives. Now, more than ever, we are in this fight together. We are of one mind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.